Now, another factor that's essential to note is this combination of wealth and age and immigration. And here what we're looking at, this is a map of the world's richest and poorest countries. The darker the color, the greater the poverty. The lighter the color, the greater the affluence. Now, if you combine that and look at the actual population, here we see that the darker the color, the younger the average age, and the greater percent of the population who are regarded as children, that is under the age of 15. If you could go up again and then down again, you can see there that the poorest countries are also the countries with the most youthful population, which in turn also have the fastest population growth. The richest countries are the countries with the most aged population and the countries with the lowest fertility rates. Now, what happens when you put those two things together? Well, what happens is the inevitable, and that is the countries that are young and growing and increasing in number, but also are poor, are inevitably going to relocate to places where they see opportunity. And where is that opportunity going to exist? Well, in countries that are already affluent and yet at the same time are demographically stagnant. And located here in Europe, of course, we've read and heard a lot about issues of immigration and refugees and asylum seekers, but the economic and demographic reality is that we need huge numbers of immigrants simply to maintain the economic situation, simply to care for the increasing number of elderly who exist within the countries, simply to keep these social safety nets that we have functioning in a liberalized Western democracy functioning. Without the presence of immigrants, legal and illegal, none of the countries of the Western world would be able to function. And we have to recognize that this is not only a challenge evangelistically, as we get huge numbers of people from very poor, very broken countries, from failed states, coming from people groups and backgrounds that are thoroughly unevangelized, coming right to our doorstep, a wonderful opportunity for mission and evangelism. We're also getting at the same time thousands, millions even, of people coming from countries that are thoroughly Christian and where the evangelical church is a growing, dynamic, passionate force. If it weren't for the presence of African born-again believers in Europe, of Latin American born-again believers in Europe, even of Eastern European and Asian born-again believers in Europe, the church in Europe would be much poorer for it and would face a much greater challenge than what we already face today. So on one hand, we can be challenged by the presence of unevangelized immigrants coming in huge numbers into the Western world. And at the same time, we can rejoice that our brothers and sisters from around the world are joining us in this country to share in the challenge of re-evangelizing Europe and in the challenge of reaching these new immigrant populations who are themselves unevangelized. Immigration, demographically, economically, even climatically speaking, is an inevitable and unstoppable tide. No amount of legislation or policing or fences or any other efforts to stem this massive tide of humanity ultimately will succeed, simply because the sheer numbers involved are too great for any barrier, whether a conceptual one or a physical one, to stop it. And the evidence is in the efforts that many of these people will go to for the opportunity to get themselves into Western countries. And this isn't just the case in countries like the UK and the USA, but it's also the case in countries like Singapore, Australia, South Korea even, what used to be a virtually mono-ethnic state, is now experiencing immigration from other countries that are largely unevangelized and bringing with them the great opportunity to do mission cross-culturally right on our own doorsteps. And lastly, you could almost say that from a socioeconomic perspective or a civilizational perspective, that immigration and the attempt to integrate these huge numbers of immigrants into our midst is modernity's greatest gamble. And what I mean by that is that what countries that are encouraging immigration, not that they can do much about it anyway, but they're encouraging immigration on the basis that all of these different diverse communities are somehow going to be able to integrate into a pluralistic society and all contribute in their own unique and helpful ways. And that the health And the future of societies like that is resting on the ability of all these groups to somehow work together to make the system work. The social safety net, the welfare system, the taxation system, all of this, the education system, all of these things. And whether or not that actually works is yet to be determined. We've seen in a number of cases race riots here in the UK. In other parts of Scandinavia, there are virtual ethnic enclaves where certain ethnic groups reside, and other groups are actually afraid to enter into those areas because they have so isolated themselves, doing the opposite of assimilation and actually establishing virtual religious and ethnic ghettos. And whether or not this is actually going to happen is yet to be determined. I think that the statistics would indicate that it's actually a mixed bag. We can see that a number, let's just take North African Muslims, for example. In a number of instances, they've assimilated and integrated into the wider workings of Western Europe. But in other instances, some of them have decided to isolate themselves and to use that as an opportunity to take advantage of the system. It's not an either or, it really is a both and. But it is a great gamble, and one that says watch this space as we look forward to the future of the Western world.